welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Rafael Carmona from the ICDR, and I want to welcome you all. And I want to take one moment of your time to remind you that you can join as an ICDR Y&I associate. If you look at our website, ICDR Young and International, you'll be able to find registration forms there in English and in Spanish, as well as recordings to all the previous webinars that we've had. You can also find us in LinkedIn. If you look for ICDR Young and International, we have a LinkedIn group and you can join. We'll be posting there all of our updates. And with that, I want to also thank you all for joining us today, as well as to our great panelists, the moderators, and the co-sponsoring organizations, the Moot Alumni Association and HK45. Check them out also, they're great organizations. And without any further ado, I give the floor to one of our moderators, Eric. The floor is yours. I think you can begin.
Thanks, Rafael. And good morning, afternoon, evening, depending where you are. I know personally, I think we have a panel from around the world today, from various different locations and jurisdictions, but all talking about a common topic in relation to arbitration, which is essentially an issue of diversity. And we've had many webinars and many discussions about the approaches of gender diversity and the importance of gender diversity in international arbitration. But today's session, I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about other types of diversity, in this case specifically ethnic diversity, racial diversity, and how it is for those of us who are Asian American, or Asian European, working in either foreign jurisdictions or even in Asian jurisdictions, but with a different cultural background or upbringing, and how those diversity issues tend to maybe cause issues or cause opportunities in international arbitration. My name is Eric Ng. I am Managing Counsel of the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center. Before that, I was a barrister at law in Hong Kong, practicing international commercial and investment arbitration. And I would leave it to maybe my co-moderator, Eva, and then the rest of the panelists to introduce themselves before we get started.
Good morning, everyone. At least morning where I am. I'm currently in New York, where I am an associate in the Skadden Arps International Arbitration Group. My practices mainly spanned across commercial and investment arbitration. Like Eric, I am a fellow Hong Kong citizen and have lived in various parts of the world, but now find myself here in New York permanently. I'm going to allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves, beginning with Innhwa.
Thanks. Hi, this is Innhwa. I'm based out in Ulsan, Korea. As to my background, for the benefit of the audience for this particular panel, I had my education, legal education in Korea, took the bar, and aside from short-term internships and clerkships in law firms, company, arbitral institute in Korea and Hong Kong, I started my career away from home in Austria. Now, after 6.5 years, I'm relocated back in Korea, working currently as a in-house counsel at Korea Shipbuilding and Offshore Engineering, which is the mid-holding company of Hyundai Heavy Industries, its international legal team.
And then maybe Roxanne.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roxanne de Jesus. I'm Vienna based. I was born and raised in Vienna. I'm partner at Pitkowitz & Partners. And from my legal background, as I said, I was born and raised in Vienna. So were my brothers. And from my roots, my parents are born in the Philippines and came to Europe or to Austria in their early 20s.
And then finally, Shengming.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Shengming Zhang. I'm a Chinese national. Got my bachelor's degree in China, and then did my first and second LLM. The first one in Germany, with Law School. Second one with Harvard, And then I started my PhD actually with Professor Kwon, as many of the MAA members would know him. And I am currently an associate in McDermott, Will and Emery in their Frankfurt office.
So as you can see, our panelists are from everywhere in the world and are currently located in every which part of the world. And as this topic is about being Asian in arbitration, we want to take a moment and acknowledge that being Asian doesn't mean one thing to every person. For example, most of us here are of East Asian descent, but that is, you know, it's a term that covers a lot of different shapes and sizes. So to that end, you know, members of the panel reside here in Europe, Asia, and the United States. So I just want to pose a broad question. What does it mean to be Asian where you are? And further to that, what assumptions are made of your background? And maybe I can invite Shengming.
Thank you. That's actually a very abstract question and a very good one, I would say. For me, being in Germany, being Asian, I'm mostly associated with my, well, how I look and the fact that I speak broken German, especially non-legal German, since I'm not German, like I didn't went through the state exam system, which is their like the German law school system. And basically wherever I walk, I'm the only Asian face in most cases, the whole law firm. So, and they always ask, Mr. Zhang, what area do you, or which team are you with? And most people would assume that, of course, I work with some international teams. Most of their guesses is either, well, arbitration, cross-border investment, capital market, maybe. And so I was, shall we say, a dose of internationality in a otherwise rather homogeneous German law firm.
Innhwa, you spent a few years at Zeiler Floyd in Vienna as well as an Asian. What was your experiences like?
I can say the same. Well, this firm started out as a dispute resolution boutique, and now it expanded its office. But its office in Vienna is a rather small family, and I was obviously the only Asian face. And my previous work as well, I was the only Asian face for some time. And I think the one thing you experience as Asian attorney working in Western jurisdiction, or at least in my experience in Austria, is that your characteristic is defined by your ethnic background first, and it's so emphasized already without you knowing much. So I think for me personally, I felt that I needed to know more about Korea, and for instance, rule changes in Korea, because people will come to you, ask you about what's going on in Korea or in Asia in general. People wouldn't discriminate or wouldn't distinguish between Korea, China, Japan, or all the other Asian countries when they come to me for any questions about Asia in general. So I think being Asian in non-Asian country meant that you had to be more aware of your background and maybe the legal changes as well as an attorney, that you would be forced to keep yourself updated with any changes, and you will be asked to explain differences in general about how the businesses are done. So you constantly train to lay out what differences there are. So I think I wasn't actually focusing much or thinking much about what there are, these cultural differences or linguistic differences that might play a role in business. But that was what I felt, that I would constantly be, asked what it is like in Asia, or what is so different in Asian culture. So that's what it meant to me, I don't know, for being Asian.
So you find yourself being a stand-in for, even for other countries
Yeah,
just by
indeed.
virtue of being Korean.
Exactly. I was asked to join meetings with Chinese clients or, any other Asian background people residing in the meetings. If that's the case, I would be asked to join because the firm would consider that having an Asian face would help promote their own, international, cultural, international approach, or they can show that they have an Asian face, just to say it. So I don't know, it could work in your favor or not. And I also think that it could work in favor of the firm if they do it sometimes, but also at the same time, it could backfire. If you meet with Chinese client and you put me in there thinking that I could bridge something, whereas me and that Chinese client might not hit it off that much, it could really go either way. So there's that element. But for me, so far, it worked in my favor for being Asian. I was given much opportunities for being Asian in a jurisdiction where there aren't that many Asians, I would say.
Roxanne, how about you? Does that experience speak to your own experiences, or do you feel that there's a measure of tokenism where you're, used as a de facto stand-in for all and any number of cultures?
Well, unfortunately, yes. Now that Innhwa has mentioned it, yes, it happens, and it's actually not okay, because if you take a Chinese client and the Philippines, they're not friends. Or, I mean, thinking that you being a Filipino or having Filipino roots can bridge a conversation because your client is Chinese, that's kind of thinking short. But I know the feeling, and I haven't experienced it in that way, but I've had conversations where, like, okay, the client is Asian and you might want to join. No, I don't want to join because I'm Asian. I might join because of my lawyer, but it doesn't really help. It doesn't really help. And with what Shengming said before, being the only face in a law firm that is Asian, I can agree with that. Or not even only in law firms. It comes to my mind, or just, yeah. I kind of notice you go into a room, you go into a hearing room, go into a law firm, you're the only Asian face. And then it passes because no one's pointing it out or anything, but you kind of notice.
So how do you handle situations like that where you're asked to be a stand-in, or where you feel like the token Asian in an otherwise white or non-Asian room?
I usually explain, because it happened with a Chinese client, and I was just explaining at that time so the Philippines and the Republic of China were actually in an arbitration proceeding. So I don't know if the client was following those arbitration cases. I don't think so. Politic-wise, yeah, but if it happens, and it has happened, I just point that out. Asia is not China, China is not Asia, Philippines is not the whole of Asia. Yeah, and vice versa. And it goes for the same, because Austrians feel offended if you say they're German. And vice versa.
That's a really good point. I also happen to be Canadian, and I, make that distinction between Americans and Canadians. So it's not something that's unique to just our region.
Yeah.
Shengming, you've spent some time in academia. Do you feel the same tokenism, or is that confined to your commercial experiences?
Slightly in the academia world. So I think this relates partially to an issue regarding what we call the secrecy law in China. It's very, very hard for a foreign researcher to get their hands into a good Chinese database. For instance, let's say the Supreme Court of China has they run like a foreign-related case data file. The database is a little bit limited, and it's all in Chinese, of course, until like I think quite recently, Kluwer and I think together with Professor Findler might manage to find a way to somehow translate a significant part of that into English. So, of course, more often than not, I would get approached with projects focusing on Chinese law, or, well, Chinese law, Hong Kong law, Macau law, occasional Singaporean law, the Greater China area, so to speak. And because somehow I believe to have a slightly better expertise in the area, which I might do in the Chinese case, I'm not that familiar with, let's say, the Hong Kong Arbitration Ordinance or the Macau Arbitration Ordinance, as just like some other general Chinese. In the academia world, that is I would say, the most obvious thing that I can imagine being an Asian that has an effect on. However, it took me quite some time, both in the commercial world and in the academia world. For me, that is the hardest glass ceiling, so to speak, to break through, that you get entrusted eventually with non-Asian matter, that you eventually become a generalist like any other arbitration lawyer or scholar in the field, rather than an Asian arbitration experts. I'll give an instance. For instance, I got involved into the world of arbitration because of my girlfriend, and that happened in my LLM year. During my bachelor time in China, I had a theoretical understanding of arbitration based on my civil procedure law class. That's pretty much it. Most of my Chinese arbitration law knowledge I gained during my time in Germany. However, when eventually at first you got approached with major research project, I had more experience, I had more knowledge about German arbitration law than Chinese arbitration law. However, nonetheless, you are the go-to person for that, because simply because you have an Asian face, you are assumed as an Asian expert rather than a generalist arbitration practitioner. That for me is the most obvious trait, the most obvious phenomenon.
And that's a very interesting point, which maybe we could open that up to some of the other panelists as well, which is that this, there's obviously the issues of being Asian in a foreign jurisdiction or a foreign firm where you're one of the only Asian faces. But I mean, for many of the people on this panel, we've also either been born or raised or grew up in the West or in other countries. Does this work the other way as well, where, because I could say from personal experience sometimes, because I was born and raised in the United States, coming and living and working in Hong Kong, there was a lot of assumptions that, you know the language, that you would be able to, read, write Chinese fluently, and even going up to court, having judges coming back at you and saying, it's like, well, we're going to do this in Chinese, and I don't really care if you're comfortable or not, because you look Chinese and therefore you must be able to speak the language. I mean, for people who have grown up or have been raised in foreign jurisdictions, does it feel like that you have a specific locale which you are more comfortable with, or is it more like being stuck somewhere in between? Maybe Eva, Roxanne, Shengming, this might be something for you guys to chime in on.
Yeah, Eric, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's definitely a common trait in Hong Kong, especially but other places like Kuala Lumpur and jurisdictions where there's more than one language that is the spoken language and business is regularly conducted. I often feel like, regardless of whether you're in the courtroom or just in like a shop, there's always this little like dance of like, what language are we going to use and what power does that confer onto whoever the dominant speaker is? I can definitely relate to that. I've split half my life, in the West and the other half in the East, and it's hard to say where I feel more comfortable. I think I feel most comfortable among people like this, where it's everyone is sort of from everywhere else. You know, maybe that's why I make New York City my home, because I just feel like there's not one single culture. I'm not fully Asian. I'm definitely not fully Western. I'm something in the middle. And I try to use that to my advantage. I feel most comfortable being the bridge across two cultures. Sometimes, yes, that means that I feel like I'm the token Asian, but it also helps me to explain Western tendencies to Asian clients, and to be that cultural gap. So I can't say that I feel most comfortable anywhere except for in the more international sphere. Roxanne, how about you? Does that relate to your experience at all?
I'd say I feel most comfortable in an international setting as well, but that comes from my interest in arbitration and everything. And I don't know, because in an international setting, it isn't emphasized where you're from somehow, because everyone is from everywhere, as you said, Eva. So yeah, but if you had asked me where I feel more comfortable, like in the Philippines or in Austria, I'd say in Austria, because I was born and raised in Austria. I'm a very huge Vienna fan. Would never move anywhere else. And I'm not being paid to say that. And it's just because I was born and raised here. I grew up here. My whole family is here. Well, I have family in the Philippines, but it feels foreign to me going there. And I do speak Tagalog, and my brothers do as well. But apparently we were told we speak Tagalog with a German accent, or let's say Austrian accent. But yeah, well, once again, we were born and raised here. So our mother tongue is German and Filipino somehow. But if you speak German all the time, then it kind of gets lost. And if you then speak Tagalog, then it will mix up with your German skills. But
I think that's a really a funny thing, you know. It's like, Eric, maybe you can relate to this as well, but it's like when you have a Chinese face and you don't speak the language that people assume that or it's not your mother tongue, that there's always an element of awkwardness where you're trying to explain yourself without giving your entire background and history. So yeah, that's very interesting that you have the same experience.
Yeah, I think, you know, for those of us who were, you know, born and raised, and I grew up in Midwest, you know, United States, which I was born in New York, but then grew up in, you know, Midwest US, and you know, one of those towns where you have maybe two Chinese families, and the other Chinese family, you know, runs a Chinese restaurant. So, you know, it's you always have those sort of situations. And it's unfortunate because the reason I asked that question is sometimes it really does feel like I'm not comfortable anywhere, either in the US or here in Hong Kong now. Just because there's always going to be that group of people who seem to think that you don't belong. You know, and even if you know, in the United States, I would be too Asian. Here in Hong Kong, I'm too American. You know, it's you know, you can hear it in the accent, you can see it in the mannerisms. You know, I'm a little more outspoken than you usually see from a lot of the locals. So, you know, it's, you know, I kind of like that because it means that I'm sort of picking up the best of both worlds, but it does also have a downside to it. It sort of brings me to the next point, which is, I mean, for those of you who have been in foreign jurisdictions, I mean, and we are addressing the elephant in the room now, which is that, you know, after the rise of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, we also saw an increase in discrimination complaints, an increase in hate crimes, an increase in both physical and verbal assaults against Asians, Asian Americans, Asian Europeans, around several jurisdictions. For those panelists who've been working in foreign jurisdictions, what has your experience been in, and do you think have you seen it get worse after the COVID-19 pandemic? And if so, how are you dealing with it?
I'll start. As someone based in New York is was one of the American cities that had like a huge increase in complaints of like discrimination. And I feel like, in America, there's this term that is used for Asians, and it's the model minority. And it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because, like, we are treated as, we're kind of pitted against the other ethnic groups or, racial groups, and pointed to as, oh, well, Asians do it this way, why can't you be like them? And there's a very much a put your head down and just work and you'll be fine. Like, don't have conversations about diversity, don't have webinars like this because that's not the Asian way. I feel like COVID-19, at least in my own experience, that sort of exposed that huge lie. Like, we are just as vulnerable to racial attacks and just as vulnerable to discrimination as any other ethnic group in America, as any other like race. And so that was really, hard to experience and quite tragic. And it definitely made me feel like the curtain was lifted for me. Shengming, I see you nodding. Is that your own experience as well?
Well, my experience in Germany regarding COVID is actually surprisingly pleasant, I would say. But I must say, for the record, I lived in both German countryside and in big cities such as Hamburg and Frankfurt. In the big cities, because of the general German political climate, it's the middle left that occupies the major cities. In that aspect, the people are much more, shall we say, friendly, especially in Frankfurt. It's an international city. So there were so many Asians going around. And the SPD, which is the middle left party, is historically predominant in cities like Hamburg or Frankfurt. I also lived in the countryside, where I am literally the only Asian in an 8,000 people village. However, that village is, shall we say, comparatively richer and better educated. Like the whole street I lived on has PhD, like it's doctor throughout the street. So the people there have, I would also say, more education and more tolerance towards Asian faith. I actually had an experience because I come from Hubei province in China, where all hell broke loose. And back then, during my last year of studying, when COVID broke out, I had 200 euro on my bank account because the Chinese banking system shut down because of a prolonged holiday, so to speak, and my scholarship from China can't reach Germany. I was literally having a problem feeding myself. I thought, okay, sure, I will go to my Chinese friend's place, eat some rice and be done with it. I haven't been back to Hubei province for almost a year, but nonetheless, I find my Chinese friends to be, shall we say, skeptical. And there were always excuses saying, oh, we're a bit busy this time, etc., etc. And my German friend actually invited me with quite open arms, like always conveniently cooking too much spaghettis and stuff, and so that I can always go and eat. So I would say my experience with Germany during COVID time is quite pleasant. Because of historical reasons, the Germans have a tendency to, shall we say, overcompensate a little bit. However, the story I heard from my Vietnamese colleagues, there's a Vietnamese population in Germany. Most come after the war as refugees, and many of them work as lawyers. Many of them work in the former Eastern German states, so Sachsen-Anhalt, Brandenburg, etc., etc. There, the possibility of, shall we say, at least verbal abuse is significantly higher. So it really depends on, I think, which states you're in Germany. But at least for my part, there's no any major influence on me, both personally and professionally, during COVID time. I mean, I got a job during COVID time, so I think that speaks pretty much for itself.
There was just an interesting question that was raised from the audience, and I want to pose it to the panel. So do the panelists with non-Anglo names struggle with having an Asian name? Would you recommend adopting an Anglo-sounding name? So I think Innhwa and Shengming, both of you have, you know, non-anglicized names, or they're phonetics of your names in your original language. Can you speak to this?
Well, the quick answer to it would be that I wouldn't have such English name, because first of all, I would feel uncomfortable having such I don't know, randomly chosen name for myself. I know that it's not uncommon for those who especially have a very difficult name to pronounce for English speakers, who would elect this for the benefit of, I don't know, being called easier. But at least in my case, I didn't feel the need, and I would actually feel awkward to have a English name that would be different from what is given to me from my parents. And unless you have a practical need for it, I wouldn't advise for that. What do you think?
Shengming, how about you?
Yeah, I went through, shall we say, both ways before I went back to Shengming Zhang. So before moving to Germany, I actually asked my German teacher, who is an 80-year-old man, to give me a proper German name. We actually sat down, we had a vote, we had a like elimination round of 16 potential German names that you should use. Eventually, he settled on the very funny German name of Rudolph, which, as I later found out, is quite unfortunate. It's shared by a reindeer, a couple of Habsburg princes, and a couple of Nazis. So eventually I went back to Shengming because, come on, like a modern young, a guy in his 30s being called Rudolph is just ridiculous. And then I had problem people calling my last name, because most Germans cannot pronounce Zhang. They pronounce it as Zhang, which sounds a bit funny to a Chinese ear because it means dirty in Chinese when mispronounced. But eventually you learn to overcome these, because you know that whatever mispronunciation they do is not out of malicious afterthought. And there is a certain compromise you have to make if you wish to like keep your proper name. And in the end, most of my colleagues managed to pronounce my name correctly. And I concur with what Innhwa said. Choosing a weird, shall we say, Western name sounds artificial in so many ways, unless you were actually born with it. And my parents went to great lengths choosing the name Shengming for me, and I personally am going to wear it proudly.
I actually have the opposite problem. So my husband and I, my husband is from the Midwest, American Caucasian, but speaks fluent Chinese. And he has a Chinese name that was given to him that is, you know, quite nonsensical, but it's you know, it's a conversation starter, at least when we're in Asia. Conversely, when we got married, my mother-in-law kept asking me if I was going to change my name to take his name. And I said, absolutely not. Setting aside from this conversation, I also didn't want to have the conversation of having a Western name attached to an otherwise Asian face, because every time I'd walk into the room, someone would always wonder, oh, well, did you get adopted or did you marry a Westerner? I just didn't want to have that conversation. So Eva Chan remains, and it shall remain. But it's funny how, you know, our ethnic identity permeates into all these different little facets. Even something and something like our name can be representative of so much more and baked into our ethnicity.
Yeah, I mean, I had similar issues when I was growing up in the United States as well. I mean, as you can probably tell, my last name caused a lot of discussion. And I would still remember when I was a child getting sent to the principal's office because apparently the school thought that my paperwork had been filled out incorrectly, and I actually had to get my parents to come over to the school to confirm that my last name actually didn't have any vowels in it, and that yes, this this was actually the correct spelling of the name. You know, so it's these sort of experiences, I think, that sort of, you know, sort of filter through and then permeate, you know, who we are, which I guess sort of takes us to the next question, which is we've all, I mean, I think based on the conversation, we've all had experiences, some, you know, to various degrees of severity, you know, or significance. How has that affected your, if it has at all? Because the answer could very clearly be, you know, it hasn't. But, you know, in hindsight, how has that affected sort of your approach to being a lawyer, or especially in a jurisdiction where you are? Do you feel like sometimes you have to try harder? Do you feel like, I know personally, sometimes I feel like I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder in terms of trying to prove, you know, certain things. You know, how has that sort of affected your outlook, your approach to being a lawyer? Roxanne, maybe we start with you.
Sorry. So Eric, you mean how has being Asian felt like you have to struggle more in a professional way?
I guess, I mean, do you feel like your experiences as, you know, as an Asian in your jurisdiction have sort of affected, you know, how you approach being a lawyer?
Okay, well, no, generally speaking, no, because thinking back on things that happened to me because I'm Asian, it has affected me. It has affected my life somehow, how I react to things like that, and like questions of where are you from? No, where are you really from? I think all of us know that question, which is, I have to say, in the past, it has, I think, always been a genuine question, at least when posed to me. I always start with, I was born and raised in Vienna, Austria, because I was born and raised in Vienna. I am Austrian. My parents are from the Philippines, so I have Filipino roots. But have things like that, oh, you speak fluent German, affected me in my professional career? I would say no. Does it sometimes feel like when people see you for the first time, you kind of have a double struggle because, or a triple struggle, whatever the number is, because you're young, you're Asian, or you look Asian, and because you're a woman? Does it feel like that sometimes? Yes, it feels like that sometimes.
So I don't think it's so much of being Asian as being an immigrant. That I think, to me, has had the biggest influence. So my parents, growing up, had this mantra that they would constantly repeat to us, which is, you have to be twice as good to get half as far. So I think that either it may be like a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, or, as I like to now think of it, is the jet fuel that's in my engine. But it drives me. You know, it's something that I feel like I constantly need to prove either to myself or those around me. So I do work twice as hard. I do, you know, try to stay ahead of the curve. But I think that has more to do with being the immigrant. And some of it has to do with, you know, just Asian work ethos that I cannot escape from.
Yeah, I mean,
I would.
Shengming, no, please go ahead.
Sorry, I would quickly stress that on my arbitration career, because I think actually being Asian has affected my, shall we say, arbitration career progress in a quite interesting way. So, like I said, I first started being, you know, the Chinese law expert. Then I graduated from that to be the quantum expert, because evidently in German law firms, they say, Mr. Zhang, you're an Asian. Is there any chance that you're quite good with maths? Then actually I am quite good with maths. Then I become the damage and quantum expert. And then I graduated from that one step further to deal with, shall we say, most of the unfortunate common practices associated with Asian countries in either commercial or investment arbitration. For instance, in investment arbitrations, I worked a lot with corruption. in commercial arbitrations, I worked a lot with, shall we say, illegal borrowing, cooking the books, borrowing from underworld loan sharks, etc., etc. And after you've done all of that, and the, shall we say, assured of your tool set, then I went back to the basic because they start entrusting you with some somewhat more generalistic work, reference schedule, submission drafting, etc., etc. So that for me feels quite interesting because generally you go from generalist to specialist. For me, being an Asian, at least I went through the reverse process.
That's such an interesting experience and quite counterintuitive, but it's amazing to see. There's been a great question that was asked a while back in the comments, and I want to make sure I float it to the panel. How has your diverse background led you to the career in arbitration? Do you think it would have been more difficult for you to practice in another legal field? So maybe Roxanne, do you want to kick us off with this?
Let me just read the question again. Have you ever arbitration? Okay, I have to confess, I have a litigation and arbitration background, so I haven't started working in arbitration for, well, I think it's been 6 years or more now, but I've been a lawyer longer. So it hasn't been all of my career, and I've only started it with Nicholas Pitkowitz, whom I'm very thankful for. But so to say, if my Asian background kind of drove me into arbitration, no, it was actually a Caucasian guy named Pitkowitz. So no. Do I think it would be more difficult for me to practice in another legal field? No, because where I work and here in Vienna, Austria, I'm just an Austrian lawyer. So I could have gone for M&A, but I'm not that good with numbers, couldn't have gone with banking and finance. And I've actually haven't heard of that, of Asians being good in math and something like that before the internet. Yeah, I'm older than the internet. I'm older than Instagram at least. So I would have felt comfortable working in any legal field.
Eric, how about you? You were a barrister before becoming managing counsel at HK.
Yeah. I was a barrister, and actually, I think for me, I think the interest in arbitration actually started in law school. I think, and I guess maybe tangentially having a diverse background, you know, this sort of goes back into the reason I asked the previous question too, and sort of picking up on Eva's point of working twice as hard to get half as far. Was that I pretty much got started in arbitration for mooting, and the first international moot that we did, I think, was in Frankfurt before a French arbitrator, a Swiss arbitrator, and a German arbitrator. And I think we were in the quarterfinals. This isn't Vis, by the way, so I can say this in MAA. And the other side was Luxembourg, and you know we walked out of that match thinking, oh, we did great. I think we absolutely beat them on every point. And we wound up losing unanimously. And afterwards, the judges came up to us and said, don't take it the wrong way, but you and your co-counsel, I obviously speak with a fluent American accent. My co-counsel, who is local Hong Kong, has worked very hard to build up a very sort of received pronunciation British accent. And he said, it's like, don't take this the wrong way, but with you being Asian, we were imagining you were going to have more difficulty with the language, because you spoke English so well. We felt that you had an unfair advantage over, the other team. This is, sort of that sort of moment made me realize, in a weird sort of twisted way that I wanted to keep doing this because I wanted to prove him wrong, but. Again, this is sort of going twice as far to get, working twice as hard to get half as far. It sort of leads into, another issue, because I think for three of the people on this panel, at least, there's sort of a double whammy of both being Asian and being a woman. And we have a question in chat, actually, which is asking specifically the female panelists whether you've experienced intersectional issues, challenges relating to being Asian and a woman. And I imagine this is going to be an interesting discussion.
Oh, I'm raring to go. Let me give Innhwa a chance. I think it's, how do you feel about this question?
Personally, I can't pinpoint any bad experience where I felt I was discriminated because I was Asian female, junior female. I think I chose to overlook these happenings as not related to anything that has to do with my race or my age or my sex. But if I were to look back and think, I can say that there were occasions, so not from my own feelings or thoughts, but my colleagues would come to me afterwards. So for one example, my superior, white male, would say something rather condescending in a business meeting to me. And I didn't think much about it at the time, or yes, I didn't feel so good, but I didn't relate this incident to him having any prejudice or bias against me because I'm Asian or female or whatever. But my colleagues would come to me afterwards saying that, yeah, well, if you were a male junior, he might have not reacted that way. He might have treated you better. And it felt like, okay, this is an ongoing thing, that if people around him would say things like this in his back and directly to me, I guess there is something constantly going on. So there are these occasions where I could say that this might have been one of those, but I've been, or at least from my approach, I've tried to not look in the negatives and try to really make the best out of my background, me being Asian, me being female, and me being young. I try to make the best out of it, and I think I so far did. But yet, like, there are these incidents that you can't avoid.
Yeah, it's sometimes that question is something universal to, I think, almost all women's experience. Like, when you are especially a younger woman in the professional world and in an international setting, you are going to encounter people with different values, different cultural expectations. And I, like you, I think, try to let it not get to me, in the sense of, like, that says, your conduct says more about you and who you are as an individual, and as not about me. There's two things happening. There's your expectations and stuff, and that doesn't have to influence my conduct and my view of myself and how I'm going to conduct myself in this meeting. But that's universally challenging. How about you, Roxanne?
I agree with you, and it is apparently something that probably all women come across, young women at least. And I've never experienced anyone telling me, okay, you're doing this worse than someone else would do because you're Asian or because you're a woman or something. I think they wouldn't do it that directly. If something that goes in that direction happens, I just feel like colleagues or clients or whomever in a professional atmosphere, sometimes they doubt you, and they might doubt you because, oh, sorry, this goes on and off automatically, I should move. And people may doubt you because of your age, because of your gender, or because of your heritage, your ethnicity, whatever. But they would never pinpoint it. They would never directly say what it is. And if something like that happens, you ask yourself, okay, is it because of that and that and that? And none of the reasons would be okay. I think it's just, as you've said before, Eric and Eva, I think you just struggle twice as hard. You just make them see that they're wrong. And until now, I've always made them see that they're wrong. So
it definitely does feel like a bit of like a dog whistle, like something that only like an Asian person would pick up. You know, I will come out and tell a story. It was really unfortunate. I was in a hearing in Europe. This was a arbitration, but not a commercial arbitration. It was a kind of like its own little unique dispute. And we had a German arbitrator or a German decision maker, and he quite literally came up to me. This is prior to Me Too, and gave me a kind of an uncomfortable look up and down, and then proceeded to ask me if I was an attorney or if I worked with the lawyers. And I had to tell him, no, I am the lawyer, I am the counsel. But it completely threw me off guard. And in this regard, I've always just looked to, the sisterhood of young working Asian women in this community. And I want to particularly give a shout out to Chan Bao, who is an alumnus of both SCADN and HKIAC. And it's to women like that. You look to the people who come ahead of you, who have came before you, and ask them for, like, how did you do it? How did you make it work in this incredibly toxic environment, or this, am I being oversensitive here? And then you just try to have conversations like this webinar and help pull up the next young associate or the next young Asian person behind you. So we are all part of a long chain. And my great hope, and I'm sure I share the panelists also share the sentiment, is that we're all in this together and we're all going to lift each other up. So I see that we're kind of coming towards the end of our time here. So I do want to ask a broad question, with that view in mind, what advice do you have for young practitioners that are coming up behind you?
Let's go with Innhwa. I see she's unmuted. Oh,
Thanks, Eric.
Too late.
I hesitated because I wasn't sure what good advice I have, but I would just say to carry on. There's nothing else. You just have to accept what it is and carry on. As Eva said, like, we are in this long chain of, I don't know, in the process, let's say. So even if there are some certain unconscious bias against you, against your background, your race, your educational background or cultural background, there is nothing you can do. And it's more about that person who is expressing that bias or prejudice against you. So yeah, I think we just have to be strong and try to look on the bright side and try to stick together and share these experiences to lift each other. Yeah, that'll be it from my end.
Shengming, anything from you?
Sure. There's this little story that I always tell myself when things get a bit hard. When Martin Luther, the German theologist was about to get trialed in the Diet of Worms in Germany in front of the emissary from the Pope. He was about to walk in the chapel, and one of the German elector counts told him, "A little monk, you've chosen the arduous path." And this is always a feeling I have for myself when I, start working on international arbitration. International arbitration is an arduous path. It has a higher entry threshold as compared to many other legal fields. And also, this is especially hard if you choose to practice as a foreign lawyer in a different jurisdiction, especially a jurisdiction in which you do not have the qualification to practice in. For instance, me in Germany. I would like to always remind myself that the greater the pain, the better the soil, so to speak. And I'm doing the job that I like to do. I'm getting to work with interesting cases. I get to work with international world level academic and practitioners. And that is in itself a blessing. And if this is an arduous road, I'll walk it until the very end. That's all for me.
Roxanne, anything from you?
I like that, Shengming. Walk it until the very end. That's beautiful, beautiful. I'd agree with Innhwa and Eva. We should lift each other up. And I just want to add that we shouldn't be trying to be more European or American or more Asian, because there will always be someone saying, hey, you're not Asian, you're not Western enough or whatever. Be yourself. I think diversity is a good thing. It's not a handicap. And if everyone gets his head around that fact, things will get better.
Yeah, and I kind of just want to, before we go, just want to take one point, and it again goes, I think, a little bit back to why, I was really wanting to be involved with this webinar as well. I've been, in my 40s, and for pretty much my entire life have been told, again, issues about the model minority, issues of you have it easy, and to put it in a nutshell, basically saying that you're overreacting. And so for over 20 years in sort of my working career, I've been sort of feeling, been put in the position where you feel like, maybe you're alone in feeling this. Maybe you are overreacting. Maybe you are feeling, maybe you shouldn't be feeling these things that you're feeling. And I think what this webinar has pointed out, and what I think what everyone should take away from this, is that you are not alone in this. These are experiences which we are which we're sharing. These are concerns. These are issues that we have, in common. And as recently as 2 years ago, even during Me Too, being told, that you're overreacting to things like this. You have to understand you can only feel the way that you feel, and that there are other people out there in this community, in this industry, in this field, who are feeling the same things. And so don't feel that you're isolated. Don't feel that you're alone. Don't feel like there's nobody around to discuss these issues with, because hopefully getting the discussion started makes it easier for everyone to not just understand these issues, but even just to talk about them.
Absolutely. I could not have said it better myself, Eric. We are all in this together. Hopefully these conversations that we've had today will show just how universal like all of these experiences are for us. Like, it's not a wolf whistle, it's not a dog whistle. Your experience, you are not blowing up an otherwise, small thing. If it's something that you feel discriminatory, a discriminatory experience, it's not all in your head. This is something that all of us face. But the one, I guess, to answer my own question, there's two things I would want to impart on a young practitioner. One is to look at yourself and figure out what your superpowers are, right? Like, is your difference your strength here? Is it your language ability? Can you play a role in bridging a divide? Do you maybe have a secret ability like Shengming for quantum issues? And how can you exploit that to your own advantage? And the second is that when these slights and discriminations happen, it's not about you. It's about the person who's doing that to you. But don't internalize it and don't make it about yourself, right? This is part of a broader problem. So hopefully, everyone would have taken something away, a little bit of light and a little bit of encouragement just in time for the holidays. And with that, I just want to thank our wonderful panelists and especially my co-moderator, Eric. And thank you all for taking the time to come join this call. Hopefully we will see you all in future webinars and even in person.
Take care, everyone. Have a happy holidays.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.